Good morning. Welcome to the Point. If you live in Michigan and if you drive a car, you have to have insurance. It's mandated by law, and not just any insurance. It's Michigan's no-fault insurance, which comes with that catastrophic claims fund, that unlimited lifetime guaranteed fund if you are catastrophically injured. Well, in Lansing over the past 2 decades, there's been a lot of talk about reforming auto no-fault and exactly what that might look like. That conversation is happening once again. We went to Lansing this week to talk to one of the people who serves on the committee looking at no-fault reform, Representative Tim Greimel. Representative, I have said this a number of times to any number of elected officials. This is the subject I've covered more than anything since I've been here for a couple of decades. And members before you have wrestled with what to do about auto no-fault. And I know you recently sat through more than 8 hours of hearings as we sit here now after before this airs, but before we have this discussion, you're going to have another hearing on auto no-fault. First of all, what is it that the current bills are trying to do? And from your perspective, what should they be trying to do?
Yeah. Well, there are a number of aspects of Mayor Duggan's proposal that we like. We like the fact that it reins in exorbitant fees charged by providers to auto insurance companies. We like the fact that it puts in place a fraud authority to crack down on fraud and waste in the system. We like the fact that it puts some boundaries around attendant care so that family members aren't just milking the system. So there are a number of provisions in there that we think make sense, that will rein in costs, but there are also some real problems with the bill. In particular, the bill really only provides premium savings for those who opt for an inferior, lesser coverage. And the other problem with that is that as people opt for these lesser coverages, what ends up happening, and we just got a House fiscal analysis the other day on this, is that it shifts the burden to taxpayer-funded Medicaid to the tune of $150 million per year. That is of grave concern, as well as the fact that this generates a lot of cost savings for auto insurance companies, but none of the savings under the bill is passed on to consumers, the actual insureds, the drivers in the state, unless they opt for this lower coverage plan, even though the savings through the fee schedule on providers, through other provisions, the fraud authority, those savings are going to be recognized for all policies, and yet all drivers won't see the benefits. We'd like to see a number of changes to this. We want to make sure that we're not cutting benefits. We want to make sure that all drivers see a real savings as a result of savings that the auto insurance companies are going to see. And really, we want to make sure that the people who are primarily benefiting from this are drivers, Michigan residents. Right now, the insurance companies, as the bill is currently written, would see a huge cut in their costs, but pass on very little of the savings to consumers, ultimately just boosting insurance company profit.
I was shocked to learn that there are people, probably in your district, paying $5,000, not everybody, some people paying $5,000 a year for automobile insurance. Compared to my experience, and I feel like my insurance is exorbitant, but it's nowhere near that kind of cost. So I get actuarial tables, and I get that there are different risks in different places, but are those risks really that much greater in your district or in districts to your south where a lot of that is focused?
Well, the short answer is no. Certainly there are some increased risk based on geography. In some areas, maybe there's more auto theft, for example.
Well, and more traffic, right?
And more traffic, that's exactly right. But what we see is that the insurance companies end up charging much higher rates that aren't justified based on the risk to the vehicle or driving factors, and are instead based on things like people's credit scores, based on zip codes, based on gender. Women typically are charged more, for example, which is outrageous. And we need to put an end to charging people higher premiums based on those kinds of factors.
So would this current bill take some of that out of the system?
It really wouldn't. The only thing that it does is prohibit the use of gender and marital status in the setting of rating, something that we support. although arguably that's already against the law and simply isn't being enforced. But we certainly agree that we need to prohibit the use of marital status and gender in the setting of rates, but we need to go further than that. There's no reason why somebody's credit score, somebody's educational level are used by insurance companies to jack up the rates on folks, and unfortunately that's what the insurance companies are doing. We need to end it.
Let me ask you, with respect, about the reduction of cost. And as you accurately point out, the reduction in cost only comes for the catastrophic care part of your insurance policy, and only if you, I shouldn't say dramatically, you either have an unlimited lifetime benefit for which you would pay the same.
Sure.
I think there's $500,000 and a $250,000.
Yep.
So you have to cap yourself at $250,000 to realize the savings. But the savings is only on that part that you pay, and it only ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 or 20%.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, that's exactly right. The number of 40% has been thrown around, but that number is just on the personal injury protection portion of the policy, which for most Michigan drivers is less than half of the premium. And so the actual savings as a percentage of the overall total premium is much less, and again, only for those who pick lesser coverage. And again, as people select lesser coverage, what that's going to do is actually burden the state taxpayer-funded Medicaid system to the tune of $150 million per year. I would go a step further, though, and say it's even worse than that, because whatever savings there is for those who select this lesser coverage, that's only there for 5 years. After that, under the bill, insurance companies would be able to jack up their rates willy-nilly, just like they do now.
You are one who has dealt with this issue. Obviously, you sat on the committee. You had a lot of questions during that really long session. We've got some really strong players involved. Obviously, the insurance industry and their lobby is very strong in Lansing. Medical and healthcare facilities, very big industry, very strong lobby in Lansing. There are some attorneys that are involved on both sides, that get into litigation. They have a strong lobby.
Sure.
How difficult, well, I won't ask it that way because I've watched how difficult it is, but how likely is it that you can take all of those different groups and at long last bring them together and say, look, this isn't about you insurance companies or you healthcare providers or you attorneys. It's about ratepayers and about Michigan not being so high, among the highest in the nation with auto rates.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I don't know how likely it is that any of these interest groups are ultimately going to agree. The real point is, it doesn't matter what they think. We should be focused as legislators, as policymakers, on what's good for the public, what's good for drivers and Michigan families. That's the key. And the key to doing that is making sure that we're reducing auto insurance premiums for Michigan families without cutting the benefits that those who are in catastrophic accidents need for long-term care.
You're an attorney and you understand how some of these things play out. And I want to ask you from your experience, if you know this, we hear these stories about how an MRI, if you and I would go in and say, our general physician referred us because we're having an issue, we have an MRI, we pay this much. If I'm going in because of an auto accident, I'm going to pay this much. Is that in fact true? And if so, how is that allowed to happen?
Yeah, it's a very serious problem. It is in fact true in many instances. One of the things that I and many others support is what I termed earlier as a fee schedule, something that would prevent hospitals and other providers from charging these exorbitant fees. There's no reason why someone who's treated with auto insurance in a hospital should have their insurance paying the hospital a lot more per procedure than somebody who's treated under their health insurance. And we need to put an end to that kind of price gouging.
When you think of this, we touched on it a little bit, you don't know what the probability is, but when you look at the current bill the way it is it fair to say that that's probably not the final incarnation of any change that happens?
I think that's probably right. There's some very serious bipartisan opposition to the bill as it's currently written. There are both Democrats and Republicans alike who say, wait a second, the right approach to bring down premiums is not to gut benefits that people need after they're in accidents. It's not to burden the taxpayer-funded Medicaid system. Taxpayers pay for enough services in this state. And so I think the key is working in a bipartisan way to keep the interests and well-being of Michigan families center and the main focus here, and not go along with special interests.
There were 2 major hearings held on that subject this week and still no conclusion, and don't expect any fast answers. The legislature may continue this conversation, but what the final program looks like right now is unclear. We'll continue to follow that and have more to the point.